Hi, all you cave dwellers, and welcome to the Cavern Podcast. The Cavern Club, the most famous club in the world. From the Beatles and the Stones to the Arctic Monkeys and Adele. Join us on our podcast for Cavern Conversations. Each episode, we talk to a special guest with real Cavern connections. Welcome to the Cavern Podcast. Welcome to the Cavern Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Keats, and you are listening to Series 1, Episode 1. So in years to come, when we're all old and grey, you can say you were there right at the beginning. I'm already old and grey, so I'm just happy to be here, to be honest. Right, our first guest, surprisingly, is best known as an actor, a Hollywood A-lister, in fact, but we're not here to talk about this, because he's also an accomplished seasoned musician with many albums under his belt, most of them with his band, the Boxmasters. He's a Cavern Club Wall of Famer, a huge Beatles fan, as we will find out. In fact, he just wants to be a Beatle. Joined by his bandmate, J.D. Andrews, welcome to the Cavern Podcast, the legendary Billy Bob Thornton.
Good, thanks for having us on.
Oh, absolute pleasure.
Oh yeah, no, it's an honor. Yeah, no, this is very exciting.
No, it's great, and it's because we're looking at it. I just said before we started recording, it should go okay because we've got matching white beards. So that's always a good point. We're okay. There's a piano in the back of J.D. Andrews. So hopefully, if it goes, the conversation is stilted, maybe a little tune on a piano would be fine. Welcome to the Cavern. And we're not actually in the Cavern, by the way. You'll see the backdrop. This is a fake Cavern backdrop in our podcast studio. But we are on Matthew Street in Liverpool, the legendary Matthew Street. Yes. You were here in July. We'll talk about that gig. You were here the first time, Billy Bob, in 2002. We're going to talk about that. But I thought, really, the Boxmasters formed in 2007, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, sort of 2006, okay. Really. Yeah.
And prior to that, you'd been solo pretty much. You've been playing with lots of bands, which again, I want to go back to what got you into it because there's throughout this chat, I'm sure the Beatles are going to be coming in and out of this conversation. And I'm looking at JD, and I'm trying to not guess the age, but I think you were possibly about the same age. And so yeah. I didn't.
He's a couple of years older.
I thought he's had a hard paper round. I didn't see the Beatles on the 7th of February 1964 on the Ed Sullivan Show, but you did, Billy Bob?
Absolutely. I think me and everybody else in the world at the time, I was 8 years old when I saw them, and, on an old Zenith black and white television, and we'd already gotten the magazines and everything in America, so there was the big build-up, and then when they came on Ed Sullivan, everybody was glued to their television sets. And it was just even though it came from other things, without Buddy Holly and Chuck Berry and Little Richard, there would have been no Beatles. But, it came back to us in a way because we all loved rock and roll. And all of a sudden, these guys bring this sort of some sort of new sheen to it. It was like a thing that, oh, wow, all this little 8-year-olds, we can do this. That's what we wanted to be. The second I saw the Beatles, that's all I ever wanted to be. But unfortunately for anybody of that era who were freaks for the Beatles, the bar was set so high that we've spent the rest of our lives trying to achieve something we're never going to achieve, just like everybody else, because nobody's ever going to be the Beatles, nobody's going to be Elvis, and so it was very, very daunting. But in my first band, we had no instruments. We were, 8, 9 years old, so we used brooms and like trash can lids and stuff like that. And everybody in my town, we had a lot of bands in my little town of 10,000 people in Arkansas, and so everybody was trying to play Beatles songs once we did get instruments, when we're like, 11, 12, right in there. And so we thought, let's be different. We'll be the Dave Clark Five, which were the Beatles' rivals, right? Yeah. So we actually started out by playing, Glad All Over and Catch Us If You Can and things like that, just to be different. But then that only lasted a few months, and it's like, no, we got to play these. We got to be the Beatles.
Yeah, they were up. They had great songs, great hits, but they were a poor substitute. Who wasn't a poor substitute for the Beatles? As you say, they set the bar so high. That's ridiculous. The thing, they did everything, didn't they, for the first time? I mean, I can imagine you seeing that on the Ed Sullivan Show. America seeing that 73 million people. They looked like no one else as well, didn't they? The whole package that was there. These guys, we didn't have bands in those days. We, over here would have maybe Cliff Richard and the Shadows, and it was it was still coming from that safe end of rock and roll. These guys, they look like nobody else, and whenever you see anything of the Beatles, we were talking before about something, the recent Get Back series. Whatever period of the Beatles, they always looked so cool.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was everything, wasn't
and
it?
We changed with them, too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you were saying you started off with brooms and stuff. The Cavern, when the Beatles played, because he played here 292 times, a 2.5 year period, and the owner of the Cavern at the time, he took over. He was the original owners was Alan Sitner, because it opened as a jazz club originally in '57, and they were letting a bit of the skiffle music that was coming in, which turned into Merseybeats. But Ray McFall, his accountant, took over in '59, and it was him who owned the Cavern through that period. He booked the Beatles for the first time. Without him, there would be nothing. We wouldn't be having this conversation, because he was the one who was more allowed rock and rolling. But the funny irony of it is, I've become, we all have, he's become a good friend of ours. His son, Peter McFall, well, when the Beatles were happening in the Cavern, him and his brother and I think two brothers, they were all about 9 or 10 years of age, and they were doing exactly what you were doing. They were going on stage in the Cavern with instruments that they borrow off. There was a junior Cavern, and they go on there and mime to Beatle records. And
wow.
And years later, I think it was the Cavern, the Cavern's 40th anniversary, we unveiled the Wall of Fame, which you are in, obviously. And they've even got a brick in the Wall of Fame for those gigs they used to mime when they were 10 years of age, because the name of the band was in the diary. And that wall was put together. So they were doing exactly the same, but slightly better maybe, because they were on the Cavern stage doing it at 10. But that's where you start, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned the skiffle music and all that. Because of the Beatles, and this is the great thing, when you get a sensation, it causes you to study their history. And through them, you learn about where they came from, too, which was interesting, because before the Beatles, we didn't have a clue who Lonnie Donegan was.
Yeah,
we didn't know he was like the Woody Guthrie of Liverpool and in that world, and then, and all of a sudden you're listening to Cilla Black, and you're listening to Lonnie Donegan, and you're listening to all the other people who were around there, like you said, Cliff Richard and the Shadows. And so, I've always loved surf music. JD and I both love that. And so to hear Hank Marvin and people like that we didn't really know. I mean, we knew the Ventures, but we didn't know that England had their own version of the Ventures with the Shadows, And so through the Beatles, we learned a lot of history about skiffle music and the music of that era and that area, through them. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I said about the Cavern opening as a jazz club, and the guy who opened it, he was very strict, but it was interesting even on the opening night. 16th of January 1957. All these dates are in my mind all the time. But there was like 3 jazz bands, but there was a skiffle band on that opening night, because even then it was becoming, everyone in Liverpool was forming bands because of Elvis, because of Buddy Holly. Buddy Holly famously came and played in Liverpool, and everyone of a certain age claimed they were there, which wasn't possible, but they were all. It was all this skiffle, and it became, it was such a creative time. I mean, I know, Billy, you're a huge fan of Gerry Marsden, Gerry and the Pacemakers, and you were friends with him. Again, we'll get into talking about that. But what was the journey after that musically for you? Because we'll get to you, JD, because you know we're still. I don't think you're born yet. Maybe JD's just about to be born in this period of music. Was that it for you? As you know, when the Beatles and the start, were you doing music throughout then? Was that, you know, has always been the case?
My first actual band was when I was about 12. And we were called the McCoveys after a baseball player from the San Francisco Giants.
All right.
And because we thought it sounded like a 60s name, you know, there's a band over here called the McCoys.
All right.
And so that Rick Derringer actually was in. And so on my little drum kit, because when I saw Ringo, it was like, I want to be like Ringo, you know? And so I got my little kit through the Sears catalog, which had cardboard heads and everything, and I painted the name, the McCoveys, on it with a crayon. And but you know, we played, you know, stuff like House of the Rising Sun, and you know, She Loves You, and you know, we did things like that. And so after that, in junior high school, we actually started having gigs, and mostly like birthday parties and things like that. And we played at the PTA club meeting at the school, and you know, that kind of thing. And then in high school, I was just in a band like all the other guys around there, and we had local heroes. There was a band called the Yardleys in our town. They were several years older than us, and they were sort of the Beatles of our town, you know. And we would look at them just in wonder. And that name, the Yardleys, came because everybody over here, because of the success of the British invasion, everybody wanted a name that sounded English, right?
Okay.
So there was Yardley of London, you know, the perfume line and all that. So they named themselves after that. But we started playing high school dances and then college fraternity parties. And then, you know, and it worked into, by the time I was 16 or 17, we were in a full-on rock band that opened for a lot of big names, actually, because they used to hire local acts to open for the big name acts.
Were you still doing covers at this point, or did you started doing original stuff?
We started doing original stuff probably when I was about 17. And
that's about right, really, isn't it? I think you've learned your chops at that point. I think it's a similar story probably to us all. Okay, now we start doing our own stuff.
Yes, that's exactly right. And we read the articles about the Beatles, you know, about how they had a talk and said, we have to play original songs and this kind of thing. So it's like, yeah, I guess that's where the deal is. We didn't know about publishing yet, and how if you ever got successful, it was really important to write your own songs. But we did it just because it seemed cooler, and it was just a more creative thing for us, because we'd kind of mastered, you know, playing whatever hits you played at the dance, you know. So then we got into songwriting, and I have to say the early songs, you can look back on them now, and you can kind of see where you were headed eventually. Yeah. But some of them are pretty dreadful, and a lot of times the lyrics would be really just kind of rip-offs of what you were hearing other people say, you know. And we didn't get into the other stuff.
That's the way you learn, though, isn't it? You know, that that's the starting point.
That's your influences.
I listen to my stuff. I stopped writing for many years. I listen to my stuff and I can go, oh yeah, that's when my favorite band was this band. That's when I was listening to that band. But it's you know.
Well, we even went through a period when the British bands, especially, there are a few here, but mostly in England, had the art rock bands and, you know, and all that kind of stuff, and everything was very fancy, and it was all about, you know, fairies and the hedgerow and, you know, or whatever it was. And, did
you have flutes and things? I hope you had flutes in the band at this point.
We had a violin at one point.
Yeah, that'll do. That'll do.
Yeah. I mean, I even listened to bands like Gentle Giant and the Straubs and, you know, with folk, you know, and, you know, that kind of thing. But Fairport Convention, I would listen to them. So everything was about, it was like the album John Barleycorn Must Die by Traffic. I was a big Traffic fan, and And so we started to want to be one of these more artsy British bands,
I
after
love
the
the fact
Beatles.
that it's always a British band.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really was. And of course, I'm like mainly English, so maybe it's in the blood. But the thing is we thought, well, we now have to wear satin clothes with the satin jacket open with no shirt with some medallion.
Perfect.
And I was in a band that didn't last long, but I remember we had to have a fancy name. So we named ourselves Ecclesiastes, which is a book in the Bible.
I couldn't have said a finer name. You know what? I've got the same stories, like completely to do with the 80s. I don't know if you know the 80s band from Liverpool, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark.
Yes, of course.
OMD. One of my favourite bands, and I've sort of got to know them over the years because then things change and I've done stuff with them and whatever. And I remember the embarrassment, and as the words were coming out of my mouth, I was saying, "Don't say it, John. Don't say it. Don't say it." And I said it and told them that, we used to come see you at Eric's on Matthew Street. There was the punk club there, and we formed a band because we loved orchestral manoeuvres, and we were called Illuminated Structures. Which was just the worst rip. And Andy McCluskey just looked at me. He was like, I think it was with pity. So we've all done that. We've all done it. That's part of the journey. JD, tell us something embarrassing from your musical journey. What kicked it off for you?
Well, mine was. I didn't play with brooms, but we cut guitars out of cardboard. And I remember for my sixth grade talent night, I was a big Beach Boys fan. And so that was kind of my first band that I was obsessed with. And so we mimed California Girls with our cardboard guitars. But, I used to record the radio every Saturday night because... especially when it was Beatles nights. But for the most part, I didn't listen to the pop music of my time. I listened to, it was called Solid Gold Saturday Night. And I would sit there and tape all the music off of there. And, special nights were Beatles nights. And I can remember telling my sixth grade teachers, like, I stayed up to, super late last night recording the Beatles songs off the radio. And I had the records too, but or I had a couple of the records, and I had the Chipmunks do the one where they had the Chipmunks had the Beatle wigs on the cover. I think they did a bunch of British Invasion songs, and it's like I love that stuff. I love the kids' versions of the British Invasion, but I've never been a person that listened to the music that was current. It's like I've always, gone back to.
It sounds like the Beatles. It sounds like you were catching up. You were catching up with the good stuff, catching up with the source.
Yeah, no, it totally was. It's like I always, was, always. I mean, Billy and I both are fans of history, and so once you see somebody, you want to find out where they came from. And I was always like, okay, these bands are cool. Let's find out where they came from. And, I always, was a huge Beatles fan, and the British Invasion and just all the bands of the 60s. I just loved it.
So the band was formed in 2007. What genre? I know it's horrible, this thing, that genre in music has become such a thing these days where you've got to be pigeonholed. And I've seen, attached to the Boxmasters, hillbilly, rock, country, Americana, which is a general genre. How would you describe it? Is hillbilly, is that a starting point?
We're a 60s pop rock and roll band. I mean, that's really what it is. And basically what we are is a band that grew up loving the Beatles and then the bands of Southern California here, like the Byrds, the Beach Boys, and all that kind of thing. So if you put all those things together, that's really what we are. We're just a rock and roll band. Unfortunately, these days, what little radio is left, they've compartmentalized everything. Absolutely. So when I was growing up, you heard James Taylor and Johnny Cash and Black Sabbath all on the same radio station. and it was just all the cool music, pop music of the time, and now James Taylor's on the old guy soft rock station or whatever, and then and there are no new rock and roll stations, So in other words, if you play original rock and roll like we do, there's no station that plays it. No. If you listen to rock music on the radio, you're going to get classic rock, which means if they play the classic rock songs of the time, like La Grange by ZZ Top, Stairway to Heaven.
Absolutely.
And so you don't hear new music. So these bands that are still around, they have no place to be. So bands like us that have been around since, like you said, 2006 or 7, they put us on Americana because they don't know where else to put us. I mean, so we're on there with Emmylou Harris and Steve Earle and Fish and whoever it is. And really, we're just a band that, to this day is still trying to be the Beatles. I mean, we're trying to make it every day. Like we act like we're kids every day.
Well, that's your last album, 69, which was the one you were on tour with when you came to Cavern. That was, I was reading something, and that was you almost writing an album like it was 1969, that period of the Beatles. And was that the starting point? Was it and did you pull it off?
Well, we've done that with a couple of albums. We've had we started out with this sort of stylized hillbilly / British invasion mashup just for a couple of albums, and then we started sounding like ourselves more, which in the beginning was a little more along the lines of the Byrds kind of sound, but with Beatle influences. But we did an album called the Boxmasters 66 also, which sounds a little more, more mid-60s, and 69, it's essentially that we play vintage instruments and we write songs that may be current lyrically, but pay tribute to the time of those records.
As a creative process, it gives you something. It is a process that you can really get into and delve into and go out of comfort boxes. To do that, I think it makes sense. It's
it works for us. I think, and we have a really good fan base. We don't have as many fans, obviously, as Bruce Springsteen or somebody, but our little cult following is really loyal and good. And there are really people who still want that music, because you're not going to reinvent rock and roll. You just have to keep paying tribute to it, It's a shame because there are really great original rock and roll bands still, going. New ones coming up all the time, too. And I think, my daughter's 19 and my boys are 29 and 30. And because of, listening stuff I listened to around the house, they all got into it, fortunately. And my son played in a band for a while, played bass in a band, and they played a different kind of music, but still he appreciated this stuff. And these days, they all listen to this stuff. I mean, my 19-year-old daughter knows that, Ringo left during the White Album, and stuff like this. I mean, she listens to the Beatles channel with me, and she's learned all this stuff.
That's a great show.
She knows the music as well as their personal lives and the whole thing, and she's very interested in it.
Well, that's interesting. We always say, people always say to us at the Cavern, what's the demographic? Everyone needs to know the detail. What's the demographic of the people going to the Cavern? And we always say there isn't one, because we've got people of all ages coming to the Cavern, and it's not just a mecca for the Beatles. It's everybody's played the Cavern. It's for music lovers and music fans. It's a place of pilgrimage. We get that, but there's so many younger people who are in the Cavern listening to this music, discovering the Beatles. The Beatles channel is a great example, and the Beatles they always keep Beatles and Apple as a company. They keep the band fresh, and these kids are all discovering the Beatles as they would discover a new band, and then they find out they've got all this back catalogue, and then they can start delving into the solo stuff, and it goes on, which really brings us right back to the very recent release of the Beatles' new single, which has gone to #1 in the UK. I'm sure it's #1 over there. We never expected a brand new Beatles song, did we? What did you think of it?
No, we certainly didn't. And it's I saw the video the other day.
It's amazing.
And it's really incredible to see that. I mean, it's one of those times when, because I'm a traditionalist, but then every now and then something comes up where technology allows you to...
Was that a pun? Now and then? Every now and then?
Yeah, right, yeah, exactly.
So you got to see what you did.
You know what? No, it honestly just slipped out. But it was... it's amazing to be able to see that. So it's an example of where the modern technology meets the thing we love from our past that we're fighting for, and they come together to actually give you something that you can enjoy without being pissed off now they're doing all these tricks. It's like, wow, to see them there doing this is amazing.
I didn't know this until I was looking. You did an album with Jeff Emerick.
Yeah, right.
Which, I mean, I got to know Jeff quite a bit a few years ago. He was involved with a Beatles show called The Sessions. He was musical consultant for that, which was meant to be, it was meant to be touring all Europe, and then it was meant to be going to Vegas or Broadway. It didn't happen in the end. So I got to know Jeff, lovely fellow. What, as Beatle fans, I mean, what was that like working with Jeff?
Well, we were blown away, first of all. We had known Jeff for several years before this, and we met him through a friend of ours who runs A&M Studios here, which is Henson now. And we've recorded at A&M for a long time. And so we hooked up with Jeff there. And he, after hearing a couple of our records, he said, you know, I'm a really big fan of this band. He goes, I love it because you guys have got a strong backbeat. He goes, that's missing these days.
Yeah.
And we were like, wow, Jeff Emerick complimented us. Well, over the years, he would say, listen, if you ever want me to produce a record on you, please let me know. And then we had these songs together that we thought, this might be good for Jeff. We'll play him some of this stuff. And he really went for it, loved it. And I remember the first time he played back a song that he had mixed, which ended up the first song on the record. He had done the same vocal treatment he did with John Lennon with that.
Okay.
I mean, everybody doubles a vocal in rock and roll and pop, but he had a way of doing it that got this certain sound, which of course he never divulged to us. But we begged him to tell us how he did this stuff. And, he wouldn't do it. But it just had that sound. And we found out through the process of making that record a few things. We learned some things that we still institute in our records now, not to the degree that he did sometimes, because we found that Jeff didn't really like crash cymbals and he didn't like a lot of rhythm guitars.
Oh, really?
So if you listen to Beatles records, when in the early days, you heard thrashing cymbals and rhythm guitars. Well, once Jeff came on as engineer, and you get into the sort of Revolver and then, Sgt. Pepper and all these records, the drums are pretty much just the drums and some hi-hat.
Now that you've said that, I will hear that every time I'll be listening for that, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's like, wait a minute, I used all that energy and it's not in here.
As a drummer, that's gonna,
But it was great. It was such an awesome experience. So we were honored every time we were around Jeff, and just to watch him do his thing, it was beautiful. And he was so nice to us and complimentary, and he really pushed us.
He's a real gent.
Yes.
Well, as I say, we met him a few times, and then he was meant to be. We do a big Beatle festival every year in Liverpool, International Beatle Week, and we probably bring about 70 bands from all over the world, South America, all the Japanese bands, and America, everywhere, and fans from all over the world. But we always have special guests, and he just agreed very kindly to come to Liverpool. I was talking to him in maybe the September, and booked him. I mean, it was great to get Jeff Emerick. We've had a lot of people over the years, as you can imagine, really connected, but to get someone that connected. But unfortunately, about 2 months later, he sadly passed away, which was such a shame. A lovely guy, but incredible to have worked with him. We've got to talk about the Cavern, because you played here in July this year with the Boxmasters on tour, pushing your last album. Was that the album that was written during lockdown? Is that right? Am I getting the right info there?
Yeah, it was one of them. We did like 2 or 3 during lockdown, didn't we, Jay?
It went on forever, didn't
it? Yeah, right.
So, Billy, you played here in 2002. It's before the Boxmasters. That was presumably in your solo project. And you did a mixture. I was interested. You did a mixture on that gig of covers and original stuff. So you're in the Cavern. So you must have done some Beatles songs. Do you remember the set?
We actually didn't do any Beatles songs. That the sound of that solo band was quite a bit different than the Boxmasters, and so we did some original songs of mine. I had 4 solo albums, but at the time we played the Cavern, I'd made my first recording in the mid-'70s at Muscle Shoals, but in terms of records for a major label and that was out, when we came to Liverpool, I only had 1 solo album out on Mercury Nashville or Lost Highway, and so we only had that album, and we had to fill it in with some covers. So that's how that happened. But what was amazing when we played there that first time, it wasn't, how now they've got all the sort of some touristy stuff around there with it looks kind of fancy in there. It's almost like a little mall, and then you right over there is the Cavern.
You can blame me for a lot of that.
Oh yeah, well, no, it's fantastic. It's really stepped up, and everything. But when we played there, it was still just the little Cavern building, and I remember there was a girl on the front row who looked like about a 20-year-old version of Sissy Spacek, the actress, and she had her glasses on and long blonde hair. And I was hoping we'd see her again this time. Of course, she may not even remember this, but she evidently had our album, which had only been out a couple of weeks, and she knew every word of the songs on that album, was standing right in front of me and was singing along with it. And to be in the Cavern the first time, I already had chills to start with. And to have this girl from Liverpool standing in front of me singing the lyrics on this record was so amazing to me. And so my focus was so on her that night, because I was just astounded that she knew anything I did.
Isn't it funny? It doesn't matter what you've done in your career before as an actor or whatever, all that success. These are songs that you've written. These are your songs, and she's there singing them back to you. It's a completely different thing, isn't it?
Oh, it was unreal, and I'd already had such an amazing time, and we'd made this plan because we had 2 or 3 days in Liverpool.
Okay.
First, it was scheduled to where we were able to be around there, and I'd always had this affinity for Liverpool. And when I finally did my DNA and the ancestry and all this kind of stuff, I find out that my father's family is from the Lancashire area, and my mom's family is from Yorkshire, so it's all northern London, northern England stuff. And I'm, by the way, I'm like 85% English or something, more than English people are. You know what I mean? It's crazy.
You said that before, now that makes sense. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it's true.
More than me.
And so, anyway, I just love the area so much. But on this tour, we had planned on, wherever we played, we were going to do it in England. We were going to play a song by an artist that we loved from that time. We were going to open our show with that.
Okay.
So for Manchester, we started the show with The Game of Love by Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders. And we invited Gerry Marsden to come to the show in Liverpool. We invited Wayne Fontana to Manchester show. We invited Dave Clark to London.
Right.
Dave was the only one who didn't show up, but we started with Catch Us If You Can. Anyway, at the Liverpool show, somehow my agent was in touch with someone with Gerry, and he hooked us up. So I spent the 2 days before we played the Cavern with Gerry Marsden and his family, and they took me to lunch, and I was hanging out, and I couldn't believe I'm sitting there with Gerry from Gerry and the Pacemakers, who I watched on Ed Sullivan every time they were on, and he was the nicest guy in the world. And probably the best anecdote of this entire thing was that I asked him, I said, look, I hate to be a fan. I mean, you've already taken me to lunch. Your family's been so nice to me. I'm going to ask you something as a fanboy, and if you don't want to do it, please say no and just slap me in the face. And he said, what is it? I said, would you ride the ferry across the Mersey with me?
All right.
And he said, I'll be happy to, because you know what a nice guy he was, and he said, sure, I will. And so we go down to where they have the turnstiles there when you get on the ferry, and it was freezing cold when we were there. We were there in the sort of fall, winterish period, and I don't even know if it was then. All I know is it was cold and gray.
I can tell you exactly the dates because for another reason. You played the Cavern on the 3rd of April, 1992. Is that correct, or have I got that wrong?
2002.
2002.
Right.
3rd of April, 2002. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so it's still quite cold here.
It was cold. Yeah, it was cold and gray. And my assistant, Felicia, was with me, and she had the video camera. Of course, back then it was one you put on your shoulder. It was a giant thing.
Huge.
Yeah, right. And so we go down to the turnstiles and to get on the ferry, and I'm standing there with Gerry and Felicia, and all of a sudden this crowd comes rushing over to us, and I, to myself, with the undeserved ego here in this situation, I'm thinking, oh great, here we go. They all ran over to Gerry.
Yeah, of course.
So, and I didn't know at that time that he's like the mayor of Liverpool, right? And so they come over to him and they all get his autograph. And so I went from being like, oh no, here they come, to, hey, wait a minute, what the hell's going on here?
What about me?
And then so once they all got their autographs and pictures of Gerry, then they came over to me, and I go, okay, I know who's boss.
Yeah, but I heard the only reason they all started coming over is you started very loudly quoting lines from your favourite films that you've done. Look at me,
right.
look at me.
I actually started saying, well, I was a rhythm guitar player in Gerry and the Pacemakers.
Yeah.
But one way or the other, we got on the ferry, and we're out there in the middle of the river. And so I said, Gerry, I already asked you for too much, but I'll ask you one more really stupid thing. I said, would you mind just singing a few bars of the song for me? Felicia got it on videotape. I've got it somewhere. I mean, on this big funky video. But Gerry sang the entire song to me while we were on the ferry, and I couldn't believe it. And then that night, we go to play this show, and we were supposed to start at 8:00.
I was going to ask you about this. People are still complaining about this. Go on, carry on.
We were supposed to start at 8:00, and we went to a pub around the corner. So if you walk up from Matthew Street, you go around the corner on this other street. There was a pub right in there, because Liverpool was playing a soccer match that night against, I think, Italy, maybe somebody like that.
I'll tell you exactly, because I've done my research on this one, because this is a bit of a legendary story in the camp. Bayer Leverkusen. Bayer Leverkusen. There you go. German team. So they were playing a German team in the Champions League quarterfinals.
Right. Okay, well, there you go. So I'm in here with Gerry and his family, and the place was full, and they go nuts. And Gerry says, you can't start at 8:00. I said, why not? He said, nobody's going to be there. They're all going to be watching the football match, so nobody will be there. He goes, start at 10. And I go, well, you can't just, everybody thinks we're going to be there. What do you mean? He goes, just go over to Neil, who I still know.
Yeah, Neil D. He says,
and he goes, just go to Neil and say, take a piece of paper and write shows at 10 and put it on the door, and you'll be fine. So I said, okay. Well, then when we were done and the game was over, Liverpool won, fortunately, and we come out of there, and the whole crowd of people in the pub were following us down the sidewalk. They were going to the show.
Oh, so
I was talking to people who were going to be there.
Right. So it wasn't a situation where 300 people were waiting for 2 hours. They were all in the pub.
No.
So Gerry, he knew it. That when you were saying that about, Gerry said, don't start at 8, start at 10. That's such a Liverpool thing to do. It's like, oh yeah, fine, everyone's going to be in the pub. You know, he was wonderful, Gerry. He was a very good friend of ours. Absolute gent. I think I was with his family very recently. We did a couple of charity events for a charity that Gerry was involved with, and it was just before you played in July with the Boxmasters, and they I don't think they were going to be around there, but they did ask me to say hello to you. So I wasn't there in July. So they were telling me like their memories of, we spent some great time with you. So it must have been, you obviously all got on really well, and a lovely family.
Yeah, they're wonderful people. So when you see them, please tell them I said hello, and tell them I've never forgotten how nice they were to me.
I've got a question. One question for you. This is for you, Billy Bob. If you could only be a musician or an actor, what's it going to be?
I grew up obsessed with being a Beatle. I grew up obsessed with being an animal or a kink or whatever it was. So if I was forced, it would be music for sure.
Luckily, you're not forced, and you can enjoy both.
Yeah, thank God.
Thank God for that. Just a quick one, really. I mean, we touched on quite a lot. I mean, have you met any of the Beatles? I mean, I don't. You know, I'm thinking in paths will cross. Who have you met? Who have you? And how was it?
It was amazing, and continues to be amazing. I know Paul McCartney, and I met him because we were both recording. We were making a Boxmasters record at A&M Studios several years back, and we were in Studio B. He was in Studio A, and I'm predominantly a vegan because of food allergies.
Right.
And I eat fish occasionally, but Paul, is a vegetarian, so he would eat lunch out in the courtyard at the studio all the time. And the Fariel, who is the woman who runs the studio manager, old friend of ours, she said, "You and Paul have to have lunch together. You eat the same." And when she was telling me that, Paul walked into the office, and he comes in, and he goes, "Billy Bob," and he comes and he gives me a big hug. I started to shake hands with him, but I mean, I was like Chris Farley on Saturday Night Live. I was like,
that's the Beatles. Isn't that the best sketch ever?
It's insane.
I was watching that the other day. That's really strange you said that. But so you became him, okay?
And he comes in and he says, "Oh, come on, give us a hug," and he does this, and I'm like, I mean, you have to understand that if I had met a Beatle when I was 8, when I saw him on the Ed Sullivan Show, I would have fainted and probably wouldn't be here right now. I'd be the only 8-year-old who ever had a coronary. I mean, so here I am, and I'm just suddenly there talking to Paul McCartney. Next thing you know, we're having lunch out front, which we did a few times, and he invited me in. I actually was invited to the listening there in the studio of Egypt Station.
Okay.
And so he's only got some like record company people there. There weren't over like a dozen, maybe 14 people there. And it was in the studio, and the equipment was still out in the live room, and they were doing it in this big ISO booth, and they had these speakers set up. Well, there was one seat left on this couch there, and Paul was just wandering around, and he said, "Well, go ahead, have a seat, So I went and sat down, and we start listening to the first song. And after a minute, Paul comes and sits next to me, but there wasn't really much of a seat there. So he squeezes in between me and somebody else. and he's got his legs crossed and his foot was on my knee. And I was like, and I'm listening to his record, and I was like, do I move my knee? Do I put my hand on his foot? What do I do here? And so then he keeps leaning over to me saying, so what'd you think of that one? And it's like, oh, I never was a Beatle fan. What am I going to say? I mean, I was like, I loved it. And every time I didn't know what to say. And that's when I turned into Chris Farley. It's like, I love that,
That's brilliant.
Anyway, I listened to the record with him. And after that, I had been given a thing by a collector. I was given the motherboards, the original plates that Revolver was made from, by a Beatle collector who's a friend of ours who we've done charity work for. And he said, you've done so much for us, I have to give you something special. He gives me these authenticated, and I brought them to the studio one day when we're still recording over there, and I told Keith, who works for Paul, he's his guitar tech and then everything else, right-hand guy. And I said, Keith, I got something for Paul. It may be weird. I don't know. You may like it. So I went over and I explained to Paul what it was. And he goes, oh, my God, you kidding me? And I said, I want you to have them because, you should have them, And so I give him those. And then he wrote me a note on the studio stationery. He drew a picture of the British flag and then wrote something to me and signed it, Love, Paul, and all this kind of stuff, which is framed in our studio now. But that's the guy I know. I had a brush with Ringo on the phone. Joe Walsh, who's Ringo's brother-in-law now, is a guy I've known for a long time. And we were doing a song at A&M. And I was wondering, I can't remember what song, And I Love Her, or one of those sort of ballady songs. There weren't really drums to speak of, but like tambourine, but it was the matches. He was shaking the matches.
Okay.
Instead of a tambourine. I was wondering, what is that he's doing? I called Joe Walsh and I asked him, I said, can you ask Ringo what that is? And he said it was a big box of matches, and I can't remember the name of them, but I think they were blue tip matches from over there. We don't really have them. And so Ringo told me through Joe Walsh how to get that sound. So that's my brush with Ringo.
And did you did you follow it through and get the matches on the recording?
We didn't have those kind of matches. I think they're only over there. So evidently the matches we have over here don't sound like that.
No, they didn't make you sound like Ringo. That's fair enough.
It did not, yes. But it did make me sound like Ringo when Jeff Emmerich had me put a tea towel on the snare and had me play a bass drum on a cardboard box with a mallet.
Yeah.
That did sound right.
I just think it's great, isn't it, when you meet these people and who've meant so much to you, and they're lovely. I mean, Paul... last time he played, because he played in 1999, which was a huge turning point when Paul played the Cavern Club in 99. It almost gave the Cavern its credibility back after, it's not the original Cavern, it's not this, it's on the original address, it was rebuilt. Him coming back was huge for us in 99, and I was there as I was invited to that one. I wasn't involved in the company. In 2018, when he came back, I was involved, but that was the album that he was promoting at the time, Egypt Station. So it's that same time. Some great tracks on that. And we had that same thing where we're sitting there, we're at the back, we're waiting. So it's like waiting for, for God to arrive. And, they're already, and he just casually walks into the room you were in July and just says, hello, everyone okay? And then just next thing, he's on the stage, and he's on our crappy little stage doing of course he's doing like an hour and a half sound check. So he's we got all the songs, which half of them he didn't even play the set. And then next thing he's on stage, and he did about 2 hours 15 on the back room Cavern stage. It was practically like an arena show. And he puts everybody at ease as well. I think that's the thing. He's so normal. I think he has his public Paul McCartney, which is, that's great, and I'm going to do the impression anyway. Every time you were saying about his leg was getting nearer to you, I thought you were going to do the McCartney voice. I just put my leg just a little bit. Yeah. But no, he's great. And for us, that was like a huge, again, a stamp of approval, Paul McCartney coming back. Question for you. Did Jay ask you about your 3 Liverpool songs that you would add to our playlist? We've got a Cavern Podcast playlist. And hopefully you both, or between you, 3 songs by 3 Liverpool Merseyside artists that have to go on our playlist. What's it going to be?
Well, I have to say, mine are going to seem like too obvious, but it comes from my childhood, as opposed to going through songs that, later on. I mean, I love, Strawberry Fields and A Day in the Life and all these different songs along. And then there are newer bands from Liverpool that, I was going to get fancy at first, but I decided to stick with the things that made me think of Liverpool, and still do. And first and foremost, I would say I Want to Hold Your Hand, because
that was the one.
It's the first one that we had over here. I mean, that was the one that struck us, and we saw him do it on Ed Sullivan, and it was the first single that I ever bought with my own, allowance, 49 cents or whatever the 45 was. And to go in there and buy that myself, and that orange and yellow capital label, and putting that on my little record player. So I Want to Hold Your Hand, which I think is one of the greatest rock and roll singles ever. It's so exciting, and it grabs you.
It's immediate as well, isn't it? It's exciting and immediate straight away.
Yeah. So that says Beatles for me. And the second would be Ferry Cross the Mersey, because of my experience and how Ferry Cross the Mersey just has that sort of sweet melancholy feeling to it that, a lot of Gerry Marsden's songs were like that.
Don't Let the Sun Catch You Crying. It's just
exactly
a wonderful
it's
song.
so every time I hear it. And but Ferry Cross the Mersey, simply because the Mersey beat and the Mersey sound and knowing Gerry has to be. And the third one is another Beatle one that I just, it's the song that made me want to move to England,
right.
Which I haven't done yet, but Penny Lane.
Okay.
Penny Lane is the thing that takes me right there, and it makes me think about the neighborhoods that they hung out.
It's a very visual song, isn't it? You can see the places.
Exactly.
We sort of take it for granted because we live here. But that music, that whole Strawberry Fields as well. But that Penny Lane just took them right back, and you can see every that was their upbringing.
Yes, we took that tour. We just said we're just going to be out and out tourists. We don't care. We'll look silly. So we went on the Magical Mystery Tour, and I admit that I took a few stones off the Eleanor Rigby grave. And Neil gave me a brick from the old cavern that I still have.
Okay. Well, Neil's a great guy. He would have given you the proper Beatle tour there.
Oh, yeah. He was awesome. And, of course, he was there this time when we played. But we went on that tour, and, you get out and take a picture by the Penny Lane sign on the corner there. And I wrote my name on the bricks on the wall there at the Strawberry Fields, with everybody else and stuff. So I did the whole tourist thing. It was, and when it comes to Liverpool and that music scene and the Beatles and beyond, any of it, and the Cavern, I have no shame. I'll act like a tourist all day long,
I did the same in Gracelands, or me and Paul actually did. I did the same in Sun Studios in Gracelands. We recorded in Sun about a year ago. We did some stuff for my acoustic session, because it's exactly the same. I'm going there. I'm going to be a tourist.
Sure.
It's got to be
absolutely.
JD, did you get the memo about the 3 songs?
I did, and hopefully
3 Liverpool songs. What?
Yeah. It's hard for me to pick other ones other than Beatles songs. But, I wanted to kind of branch out a little bit. I want to start with Lovely Rita. For some reason, that song's always been one of my favorites. I love the sound of it. and I think the lyrics are just funny. And it's like the same as when I was 5 years old. I thought the song was funny then, and I still think
it's a quirky one. Yeah, it's a very quirky one. That.
And then, I've always been a George Harrison fan. Even when, working with Jeff, he would tell us, you could tell he wasn't a big fan of George, or as much of a fan of George as, Paul. But, like My Sweet Lord, I've always been a big fan of, because I'm a recording nerd. And so that kind of mix of, Phil Spector with the Beatles, that is, a big fun thing for me.
It's a great song and a great...
And then, it's... Even if he ripped it off from, that other song.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But the Renettes, was it the Renettes or so? He's so fine.
Exactly. One of those.
So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then I was like, oh, let's get a newer one. And then Billy and I are both huge fans of the Wilburys. And so, since George was kind of the driving force of the Traveling Wilburys, Handle with Care, was kind of the start of that whole group. And so I thought I'd pick that just to do something, a little.
Yeah. No,
you can't exactly call it current, but it's, it's, and the Wilburys, had so many of our favorite, people. So it's like, I'm
a huge Roy Orbison fan. I used to be an actor, and I toured. I don't know if you've ever done a long run in theatre, Billy Bob, but I toured for 12 months in the Roy Orbison musical. And I started off as a Roy Orbison music fan. But after 8 shows a week for 12 months, it was a while before I could listen to the stuff again. But, but Roy Orbison, the fact that they got Roy to be in their band, do you want to be that's fantastic. What a band. Great choices. Interestingly, for JD, for you doing the Cavern, obviously you played 2002. Did it mean the same to you? Was it a big? I presume it was a big thing. When the Cavern's on the tour sheet,
it was huge. I mean, it was super special. And I'm really sad that we were only in Liverpool one day. We got to, on this tour, we got to spend a couple of days in each city, and Liverpool was the only stop where we only had one day there. And we had to do, some stuff during the day. Yeah. Well, it's my fault. I wanted to do a show in London as well. And the only place to do a show in London was the day before Liverpool.
Okay. Yeah,
because originally they didn't have us playing in London.
Where did you play in London? London, out of interest.
The garage, as we call it. The garage, as you call it.
Yeah. Or in Liverpool, the garage. It's in the garage. Yeah. Well, all that means is, fellas, you've got to come back to Liverpool and spend a few more times and catch up with Gerry's family, catch up with us lot, and I'm going to wrap things up now because I'll let you get on with your day, and I'm so inspired that we're recording this on a Monday night, and we do an original music open mic in the Cavern Pub. I don't know if you went over to the Cavern Pub, the pub that we've got over the road from the club. And we've got a songwriters night. It's been going for about 12 years. And it's called the Monday Night Club, funnily enough. And it's a real creative hub. There's songwriters, there's poets, we've had plays on there. And I'm so inspired after this conversation, I might go and grab one of the guitars and go and play a few songs over there. So I shall raise a drink for you at the bar. Tell them I've been talking to the Boxmasters. But please do come back to Liverpool. Hopefully get over it, especially, 85% English, which is more than me. I think I'm Scottish and Irish somewhere. But thanks very much, fellas. It's been great. And
thank you.
Best of luck with the next album. Just keep it. But this will be album 18, the next one. You had about 17 albums, 14?
I think so. 17 maybe is the next one. Yeah, we've got 2 in the can already. And the label will only put 1 a year out, so we have to find other ways. We have, I may as well tell you this, we have a concept record that we did. It's a 2-volume concept record, and it's not by Ecclesiastes. It is the Boxmasters, and we're thinking about putting that out just on our website before Christmas, just to have our fans have something, because our next record doesn't come out till next fall. So you may, keep an eye. We'll send you one.
Yeah, that would be great.
It's called Stranded in a Stain, and it's a little different than what we normally sound like. It's a little darker, a little more Pink Floydy than Beatley, maybe.
As long as on the cover you've got the satin jackets which undone with your chest out, that's fine. And a few violins and whistles. Listen, guys, it's been great.
We haven't done the artwork yet, so that's a good idea.
Oh yeah, you've got the cover.
Give those boys in the studio there with you a hug from us, and when you see Neil, will you please give him one as well?
Absolutely, and I will say hello to the Marsden family, and it's been great. Please. Really enjoyed it. We're going to go for a quick pint in the pub, sing a few songs, and we'll catch up and see you in Liverpool. Thanks for being on the Cavern Podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cavern Podcast, and we hope you enjoyed it. Remember, we can't do this without you, the audience, so please like, share, subscribe from wherever you get your podcasts from. Also, get involved on our socials and tell us your Cavern stories. Join us next time on the Cavern Podcast.